How's it going, everybody? Welcome to this week's LUMIX Live. We're tentatively, I'd say, on a streak again. We're 2 weeks live, actually back doing this broadcast instead of having to do some recorded sessions. But yeah, so we're back. As the title says, this is going to be a bit more of a walkthrough session with some Q&A, kind of tied in throughout the stream. So I've got some information to kind of be able to share and show you guys. I'm going to be using an S5 Mark II for today's demonstrations. But also I'm making sure to leave some time so that there's good Q&A options for a lot of people as well. Wow. It's been a long morning so far. So sorry if I seem a little off or slow to get into this. Yeah, so if you have questions or things that you want to chat about, make sure to drop them in the chat, tag at LUMIX USA. It just helps me see them so I can get through to them, and then we can try to get some answers for it. I do have one topic that, if you've been watching the chat, that Chris has dropped actually over on the Facebook post for the live stream today that I want to try to address as well, or at least try to come up with some information for you, Chris. But also maybe others might find some good use in that as well. So that's kind of what these streams are all about. Before we go too far into that part of the conversation, I want to remind those of you in the United States about LUMIX Pro services. We have the Red and the Platinum tier available. The Red tier is free if you've just purchased the LUMIX camera or recently purchased the LUMIX camera. You can follow the QR code on the screen or just go to the link down in the description. Get yourself registered on the Red tier. It is free. It comes with the purchase of your camera. But if you're someone who likes a little extended level of service and support, you can, after you've registered, you can upgrade yourself into the Platinum tier as well. Now, the Platinum tier gets you that added 3-year extended warranty that's included with the Red tier for free. But on top of it, you're going to get 2-day repairs with next day shipping both ways, 20% off out of warranty repairs. You get access to our membership hotline where you can actually phone in 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern time to speak to someone directly and get your challenges or issues or problems hopefully dealt with that way. And you also get a pretty cool welcome gift in the Platinum series. It's been a while since I looked at what the gift is. I think it's still the Peak Design straps. But yeah, I encourage you, if you've got a new camera or you're planning to get a new camera over this holiday season, make sure to keep that in mind. Again, the link in the links down in the description, and the QR codes are always up at the beginning of every stream that we've done, at least for the last couple of years. So with that, yeah, like I said, you can tag us with your questions. Make sure to tag at LUMIX USA with your questions so that I can actually see it. And JE, it's Monday through Friday. Yes, Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. So business week. And then you'd be able to get into them. Yeah, so yeah, if you have questions, make sure to tag us in the chat, like you can see a couple people doing. This way I can at least get you some of the information. So we're going to start off with a couple of the questions that I've seen come in. And then I want to address Chris's question, which I just have to pull back up on my screen because I stupidly closed the browser for it. So I can try to get to his question. So there it is. Cool. All right. So let's see here. So Chris, the other question that you had asked is GH7 ProRes RAW is 12-bit internal, right? Yes, it is. It is a 12-bit ProRes RAW recording internally. How come it can't do OpenGate RAW like the Ninja can? Hardware, card limitations. My understanding is that OpenGate RAW requires a lot higher data rates than the 17:9 because now you're adding in more vertical pixels, you're adding in overall more resolution. So if the 5.8K RAW option that you have, which is a 17:9, is at 4.2 gigabit per second, the OpenGate has to raise also. So you start to really push into those ultra high bit rates and the feasibility of data storage with them. I believe there is also potentially some thermal challenges there too, that while the GH7 is incredibly well cooled, you can still overwhelm cooling solutions. So a lot of it comes into with the kind of benchmarks that we use for reliability and performance. What can be included? What can the processor do? Because that always does also come to another kind of point, right? Is the external recorders, they are dedicated devices for recording and just displaying an image. They're not also trying to run the sensor, the actual, kind of stabilization, all that other kind of stuff. So you start to run into potentials of, even as advanced as some of the most, high-end processors are that cameras are using, you can still, exceed what their processing capabilities are. It's just a fact of, kind of the hardware. But in that particular case, I believe it's kind of a combination of a couple of things. Some of it has to do with hardware. Some of it is how close you get to card specifications. I don't think necessarily the speed, but it can run in, or like what the theoretical speeds are, but a lot of it can also come into what the actual kind of sustained write speeds of some of these cards are. Even CF Express, with how much faster it is than SD cards, still does have ratings for what their speed ratings for sustained is. So you really start to run up a lot of various different components as to where, maybe one individual isn't a clear reason why, but a combination of them is why you may not see it. But we're always looking at improving and pushing things forward. So I honestly don't know if there would ever be an internal open gate raw recording, but we will always ask and see what happens. Whoa, thank you. Let's see here. Hood says, can Panasonic S5 2X USB give out display port data? I asked Blackmagic about their new Pixis monitor, which says that's how the monitor works and could be used on other cameras. My understanding is no, the USB port does not do display out. So yeah, it wouldn't be compatible. Is this US only, or does this also account for Europe? OG, I assume you're asking about LUMIX Pro Services. There is LUMIX Pro Services in some European countries. If you follow the global link, or the global portal link down in the description as well, you can see what's available in some of those regions. Let's see here. Best part of Thursdays are these streams. Awesome. I'm really glad to hear that, McCary. McCary says, could you explain G9 to diffraction compensation? Guide page 339. This increases resolution by correcting blurriness. Noise may stand out. Is this sharpening? So what diffraction compensation does, for those that may not know, or maybe this is a bit too far from where your experiences may be in the photography side. Diffraction is a softening of the image as you stop a lens down further. And it's because the light has to come in, go through the aperture blades, and then it has to spread so far back out that you lose sharpness in the image. It changes based on resolution. It changes based on the... I don't really think it changes too much based on focal length, but it changes on resolutions and the size of the sensors to where your kind of like optimal point is for any particular given lens. What we have is a feature called diffraction compensation, because we know what diffraction looks like at various different aperture positions. We can apply some software correction for it. At a base level, there's going to be a mix of some sharpening and some, just processing to those pixels. It's why, like, if you're, like, some of these features, like if you go and you shoot, say, like vlog, or you shoot raw video, you see a lot of this stuff is not available because it's a process. It's something that's being done to the image to correct for it. So that's kind of really what the basis of diffraction compensation is. It's really just to help clear up some of the problems that you see as you get into diffraction. Now, the second part of your point there was G9 Mark II is already at a max resolution of 25 megapixel. Yes. And does this work at, with you if you have teleconverters and stuff? Well, yeah, it does. I think there are some caveats to it with teleconverters. Teleconverters can introduce some challenges when it comes to certain processing. And a lot of that more just comes down to how often teleconverters are used. So the likelihood of needing certain features can change depending on I think every camera system and lens and combo that way. So, but yeah, the diffraction compensation thing, if you're shooting in JPEG only, I don't see any harm in using it or leaving it on. It's kind of the same. I put it into the same bucket as things like the eye dynamic and eye resolution stuff that we used to have years ago. These are all processing things. So if you're someone who's a bit more of a purist and you want to work with an image, as it happens to sit and then handle your processing in post through software, go for it. If you want something that comes right out of camera and you really don't have to spend much time in post with the images, then use the tools that are there. That's kind of really what the general, I'd say, perspective of, that feature would be. SN, please bring an auto capture feature. So something like that, even if it's, because I've only recently started hearing people ask about, something like an auto capture feature. And for those that don't know, I think this is referencing things that we used to use triggers for, or still primarily use triggers for. Things like sound and light and stuff like that to capture stuff like lightning or things like that. Even if that was something that, like we were presenting right now, you would still wait a while to see something like that, because anything that ever gets added into a firmware update is something that has to go through a number of layers of, is this something that's actually beneficial to the majority of users? Is this more of a, kind of niche feature? Doesn't change our value on them, but it understands more of okay, well, what gets priority to be developed? What's involved with developing it? Is it something that can be developed in cameras? That kind of stuff. But we can always take those comments, because definitely it's why we say if you have recommendations, drop them in the comment field after this video goes live. One, that helps us with the algorithms of being seen more. And two, it helps us actually be able to reference our engineers to say, hey, this is exactly what these people are asking for. It's just an easier way to kind of collect that kind of information. So yeah. Let's see here. And Chris, any more info on the new update for the GH7 version 1.2 dropped yesterday? Yeah, it's actually one of the things that I was gonna quickly talk about here. So for those that don't know, if you have a GH7, we did push a very minor update here. Improved noise in high luminance areas of the image, generated in specific shooting environments when recording in ProRes RAW. So it's a corrective thing only if you're shooting in RAW, and you have situations where there's high luminance, which means really high brightness. Just an image quality fix. That's pretty straightforward for that. So let's see here. So I want to take a look at Chris, your question that you submitted before the stream started. So the question was, I've got an AF question that I type here because YouTube limit character limits. It says basically on the GH7 AF, when you're standing still and a subject walks towards the camera, the AF keeps up fine. Works great in full area mode with human detection, one area and one area plus, and it works great. When you start moving and the subject is moving, is what I'm paraphrasing some of the commentary. It says, when I start moving and the subject, with the subject, there's weird spurts of lock on and losing the subject, almost as if the camera's lagging to keep up. In that scenario, what would help me track the subject as I move with the camera for walking shots, stay on a gimbal or things like that? And then shared me some of your settings that you have there. So a couple of things that I want to talk about actually here. So I have my S5 Mark II set up here, and I want to talk about, where is it? The AF custom settings for video. So for those that have not used any of this part of the menu systems here, we have a couple of different options here, and it changes whether or not you're in photo or video. In this case, we are in the video mode, and it tells you AF custom settings for video. So to start with, you have AF speed and AF sensitivity tweaks that you can make to the particular image. So the AF speed is literally what it says. It's the speed. How fast is the system going to move when it's racking to and from the points that the phase detect system is picking up, or kind of informing the system on what to do. So if you adjust this down, it's going to move slower. If you adjust this up, it's going to move faster. Then you have AF sensitivity. And this is the sensitivity for the refocus when a subject moves. Locked on, so negative, means that it's going to take more time to wait for a subject to move. So think of this as what I think a lot of times you see a demonstration of is you're focused on your subject, and then the subject walks behind another subject, and there's that difference of where the subject is lost behind a blocked object. So if you're using a one area point or something like that, you're going to see that the camera's going to override because it's not seeing a subject anymore. It's going to go to the focus point that you've got identified. What locked on means is that it's going to hesitate when it doesn't see that subject anymore before it says like, oh, okay, something changed and the subject now moved. And then it reverts to whatever AF mode that you've got your camera set to. As you push this more and more positive, it shifts to be where it's going to be much more touchy for that kind of setup. That means that as the subject, say, walks behind a tree, it's going to be more likely to, if you're using one area plus, zone, or any of the defining focus modes, it's going to be more likely that it's going to snap to focus to another point. And then when the subject comes back in and the box goes back over them, then it's going to snap back to that point. Now, this is that I'd say challenging setting, right? So in this case, the information that Chris kind of shared means it's using -2 for sensitivity. One of the things that can happen, especially if you are adding in motion on top of the subject moving, is that one, the calculations become, for any autofocus system, this is true for all cameras, whether it's contrast or phase detect or LiDAR or whatever it is, the calculations become a lot more complex when you add another factor in for where the movement is, because now the rate of speed change of the kind of distance that's being measured really jumps up. It goes from maybe like, say, 1 millisecond, it goes to maybe like half a millisecond or quarter millisecond. So in a case like this, Chris, what I think is that by shifting your AF sensitivity, and for those to remember, AF sensitivity here, what I think happens is that because you're moving with the subject now, as you're moving with the subject, you actually need that sensitivity to be higher, because what you'll end up seeing is that the slight pause that's being given, because it's waiting to see what's actually changing, is being compounded by how much you're moving with your subject, right? And typically in a static shot, so like what I do here, this is where you want things to stay a lot more locked on, because otherwise that's where you see, and I'm sure we've all seen them on the YouTube video, like on just general YouTube videos, where all of a sudden I could move maybe a millimeter forward and then you just see the focus system do this. And it's true on phase detect systems that it does this. I've watched many of our competitors' cameras on popular YouTube channels that it's just doing this nonstop. That's not a fault of the AF system. That's because the AF system is tuned to look, really, really rapidly at every little single movement. I think you can consider this something like a polling rate. How many times is it checking for it? So in your particular situation, if you're using like the one area plus, you have two things working for you there. One area and one area plus will always become the override. So if, as you're moving, the subject detection is shifting, so between face, eye, body, that kind of thing, and it's constantly jumping around, the moments when subject detection is not being utilized there is where it reverts to one area. So that can be, like kind of the issue where, like, if I move my hand in front of my face and now it shifts here and then I move it back, that's because you're removing the subject detect. So maybe going to a zone could help that as far as detecting what the subject is. But now once you add more movement into it, so the bride or groom or couple, whoever it is that's being captured, as they're moving, if you shift the sensitivity more positive, you'll probably see that the system's going to be more responsive at keeping with the subject, because it won't start to build a loop of subject moved, I gotta wait a second, okay, now I can refocus. But then by the time it's kind of through those cycles, the subject's moved even further, or you've moved, or you've adjusted. And that's why you may be seeing that kind of like where the relay of information about the phase of the pixels, like the distance that it's measuring, can be slightly out of step with where you want to go. It can change very rapidly. So for your setup, if you see that the speed itself is okay, that like, hey, it's moving fast, but it's not landing at the exact spot that I want it to, that's probably more the sensitivity. And I would actually suggest to try it the other way. Go maybe +2. And obviously, try this, not on a wedding, try this in situations where, you may have a little bit more control over the situation, because that could help with your general setup. For my cameras, especially when it comes to video, I'm usually leaving everything at 0, because what I find is that if it's a challenge of matching speeds so that the focus points that are being detected and the distances that are being measured out stay as consistent as possible, usually because I'm also, like, if I am moving while filming, it's because I'm trying to keep the same framing anyway. I find that it's easier for me to learn to slow down or speed up than to really go too far into camera settings. I hate going into camera settings, but we have them here so that you have some of that option. So yeah, hopefully that kind of helps for you, Chris. I'm definitely curious. Definitely let me know if you find that helps. And others, if you were running into any kind of similar thing, let us know, because I think some of that stuff can really help us, or I can really try to help for more kind of questions like that. All right, I'm going to do one more question, and then we're going to jump into the actual topic of today and start talking about, because I got a ton of questions about loading LUTs into your camera, how to do it, what ways do I recommend now, and I want to show you the LUMIX Lab method with the S5 Mark II now. So, let's see here. Thank you, YouTube. Just for clarity, questions about anything new, upcoming, future stuff, I don't answer on the stream. Even if I did know, I wouldn't be telling you until I was allowed to say anything. Question about warranty. Signed up for Red, and I was wondering if I have to pay anything if something is wrong with the sensor. Warranties depend on... there's a lot of things that go into warranties. If it's a warranted item, no, I don't believe you do. If it's determined that there's, it's something out of warranty, then yeah, you would pay for something out of warranty. But that's up to that customer service and support team on the determining factors for that kind of stuff. Let's hear. FC, 2 questions. Will recording in Vlog fix over or underexposed parts of video in post? Do I need to record video in Vlog to use LUTs such as Rec 709? This is a good transition to the LUT conversation. So, to start with, recording Vlog doesn't really fix anything over or underexposed in the video. Log is just the encoding or the color space that you're going to use to record in, right? It's going to be a very compressed tone curve that you see that when you bring it back out, then you've got your correction. Most important thing with it is, if you're worried about objects that are overexposed, use tools like waveform, use luminance spot meter, stuff like that. Just make sure that you're not, clipping them past the clip point. Luminance spot meter gives you an actual stop count over and under. Same in the shadow region. Make sure that it's not buried, 8 stops under. Typically, Cine D, I think, does a really good kind of explanation of over-under capabilities. I think usually around like 6 stops is right around where you're probably not going to need noise reduction. because you're really digging shadows up at that point. And highlights, it depends on the camera that you're using. S5 Mark II, I believe you can go 6.5 stops up, I think is where we can go on that camera. I can take a look when I cut to the camera. But yeah, so like that's really what the tools that you want to use for it, to help manage over underexposed. You will get more flexibility than if you shoot in, say, a native Rec 709 color profile. Now, the second part of the question, do I need to record video in Vlog to use LUTs such as Rec 709? And it depends on the LUT that you're using. Your most direct way to a 709 color space and kind of workflow is, yes, you're going to record in log, and then you're going to use a corrective LUT to bring it into 709. Like I said, that's like the most direct way. That's what you're most commonly going to find. It is harder to take something that's like standard and put it in 709, because usually standard, vivid, natural, stuff like that, even neutral, they're compressing and increasing contrast because they're not broadcast standard color profiles. 709 is a standardized profile at a very base level. So yeah, you would most likely want to record in Vlog for that kind of thing. Now, the reason why I say this is a really good transition is because this goes right into talking about LUTs. So for those that have updated your S5 Mark IIs, we have added the real-time LUT function into this camera, but in the way that we've deployed it on the S9s. So in my particular camera, I have my down arrow assigned to the real-time LUT function now. So you'll see this is it's in the menu. If you press and hold one of the menu or the custom function buttons, you can drop right in to reprogram that button itself. So now if I click on this, it's fully programmed. I can press down, and now I can drop into the real-time LUT system like I have on the S9 and on the GH7. So I can go through these various different options here and just change them up. Now, the thing to remember this is that, when LUTs were first deployed on the S5 Mark II, you didn't have this function. What you had was you would always work in Vlog if you used the real-time LUT named color profile. So if I went in, and actually I'll do it this way. So if I went in and I go into my color profiles, I would always be using this, which is always based in Vlog. And then I would be scrolling down and changing which color, which profile I want to use. This is how I would be able to go in and pick the color profile. Now, we've changed things on the newer cameras. So there's newer ways to do this. We now have the actual color profile tied real-time LUTs. And what does that look like? Well, if we take a look here at my tablet here, I have LUMIX Lab open. I have my S5 Mark II connected to it, and you'll see that I'm not actually Wi-Fi connected to the camera itself. I'm just right now in the base part of the app. So if I go down and I look at my LUTs here, you'll see that I have, right now it tells me what LUTs are on the device. So in this case, it's what are on my tablet. And you see I've got a number of them in here. I've got, some Kodak 1930s. One, this is actually art of photographies. Then I have a bunch that are actually from the LUMIX Lab app. So we've got the download option here, where if I go into it, I can pick movie and stills, figure out which looks I like, kind of say like, hey, I like this warm film one, I want to download it. It'll tell me which color profile it's based on. So you'll see that this is based on Vlog. All I got to do is tap download. We've talked about this numerous times. Super simple to get them down from Lab into the app. But now what do you do with it, right? So we've had a lot of questions, so people have your own LUTs that you've created, right? And maybe you want to bring them in and put them into the camera. And the traditional way of doing this was I would literally take an SD card, put them in the root folder here, and depending on the type of card, depends on which, extension I can use, whether it's a .vlt or it's a .cube. You make sure that they're 33-point .cube files, and then you can name them up to 255 characters with the extension. But if you have a .vlt file, it has to be 8 characters, is what you can use. So you have to be a lot more careful with the naming on those. So that process was fine. You would load it onto the card, put it into the camera, and it's great, but you can't tie that to a color profile. You would always have to remember, hey, I want to take this profile that was shot or created on, say, standard, and I'd have to remember to put the camera into standard so that things would look the way I wanted them to, the way I built them to look. So now, what I can do instead is I can take that LUT that I create, whether it's a 33-point cube file, and I emphasize that a lot. It needs to be a 33-point .cube file. I can then load that into something like Google Drive and have the actual just .cube file there in Google Drive. Because from LUMIX Lab, now that we have the connection with the S5 Mark II, all I do is press this button up here, and when I tap on this, it opens my Google Drive account. It should open my Google Drive account. There we go. And you'll see, like, so I have Asteroid City. This is actually one of Nick Driftwood's LUTs, which is awesome. I forgot to put a link in the description, but I will, so you can go take a look at those. And then I have a couple of these other ones here, and then I have a random one that I created in Photoshop. So I want to import these into LUMIX Lab. Well, all I have to do now is just tap on it. This will then read that LUT, import the LUT in here, and it asks me right away, what color profile did you build this on? What is this one supposed to be tied to? So I can come in, tap on standard, and know that, okay, I created this one based on Vivid, which was the profile that I used. I created my raw file with that color, that profile interpretation for the colors, and then I generated the look I wanted. I can rename the LUT in the app itself, and then just tap set. Now that adds it to my device so that when I scroll all the way down to the bottom, you'll see it says Tokyo Lights 2, and it has the Vivid camera, or the Vivid color profile tagged to it. This is that, kind of crucial step for making sure that the real-time LUT system works the way you want it to. So now, okay, cool, I've got it on here. Let's add another one. Let's say I want to take the Asteroid City one. This is a Vlog-based color profile, so I can tap down, scroll all the way down here, and I can tap Vlog, and then tap Set. And again, you'll see now that one's added to the list as well. And then let's add one more. Let's add the Velvia 50 look in here. Bring this in. Now, this is not something that was necessarily created with our cameras, but standard is probably going to be the closest one that I want to use for it because it's what I like applying that to. So I would just leave that on standard and then tap set. So again, very simple to import these in, but it's more about making sure that the LUT is the right precision. So it's a 33-point LUT. So you have to make sure that you have that, and then when you try to load it, the one key thing here is that if you have .vlt files, so those are the older LUT file that we used to have to use on Lumix cameras, you cannot load them in LUMIX Lab. You would want to use some sort of converter to change that from a .vlt to a .cube. And again, make sure that it's 33-point, not 65-point. 65-point won't work. So once you've got, we've got those on here, right? I can go back into the camera, and all I have to do here is just do LUT transfer. Now, because I've already got the Bluetooth connected, I've gone through, this is going to trigger and say, hey, I need to connect to the camera. So it's going to tell the camera, turn your Wi-Fi signal on. It's found it. I just tap connect, and you can kind of see on this screen here, it's gone dark. Now you'll see I've got camera, so it's what's on my camera itself. And then I've got device. So I can scroll all the way down and say, hey, I want to send that Tokyo Lights one over. So I just tap it, transfer to camera, scroll down to an open slot or a replacement slot if I want to. So I can do this onto 13, do LUT transfer, and that LUT's now on the camera. Say I want to scroll down more and I want to take the Velvia one, transfer this over. But say I want to take this Velvia one and I want to replace one of the ones that I have on here. So let's say I want to replace everything golden. It'll give me a little warning and says, hey, are you sure you want to do this? You're going to overwrite something. Tap yes. Cool. The LUT's now been transferred over. Now, there is the option now to also just be able to come in, disconnect. I don't want to be connected into the camera anymore. So now when we go back to, it's this switcher is the one that I have to use. And we'll connect into here. Now we are back. Yeah, now we're back. So from here now, if I press down on the directional pad, you'll see that I've got that Asteroid City. This is that vlog profile. I've got the Velvia 51 that I just loaded on. And I've got that really crazy... This was a number of streams ago. I went really, really crazy on this LUT. And now this one's loaded in as well. So now I've got all of those options that I had in here, really able to just tap in and pick the one that I want. That is now actually tied to the color profile. Now, if I do this the other way, or the older way, which is just load them onto the memory card and then put them in the camera, and then, I don't know why I cut away from that so early. Cut away from the setup here and go into LUT library. I can scroll down to an open spot and say load. This is where you can just put them onto the card, load them in. The thing to remember is that doing it this way, they're not tied to a color profile. So if you use the real-time LUT quick action, so just by, in this case, pressing down and using this method, when you go to that LUT, whether or not it was designed for vlog, it's going to apply it over vlog. That can result in some negative looks. So if you have a look that was created for Cine like D2 and you want to put it onto the camera, but then you want to use real-time LUT, unless you go through the lab side of it, which will then link the two of them together, it'll be trying to apply that over vlog. The other way that you could do it, and this was the older way to do it. I don't really recommend doing this anymore. Because we now have the real-time LUT function in here, is literally going into the My Photo Styles, picking the base profile that you want to use for that, then scrolling down, picking the LUT that you want to apply, and then going that route. That is one of the other ways that you could do this. Again, like I said, I don't know if I really recommend that unless you're needing to do that specifically so that you can stack your LUTs, because under the My Photo Styles, you can do LUT 1 with its opacity, LUT 2 with its opacity. That's where you can add the grain effect onto the profile itself as well. So you can add grain, and then you can also add color noise to it. So you have a lot of control over them. But if you're looking for the most simple, straightforward, kind of process with it, it's going to be using the real-time LUT function and the LUMIX Lab method of going in and applying those LUTs that you have within the app itself. All right, let's take a look at a couple more questions that came in here. Let's see here. Oasis tried... let me see here. Tried... shorting LUTs in LUMIX Lab, but no effect in the sequence of camera LUTs. There is no way to know which LUT is which. Needs to be addressed for better usability of this feature. Oasis, could you clarify what you mean by trying to sort for them? I'm just trying to understand what the concern is, because it might be a more simple thing than... or there might be a different way as to how we're identifying the LUTs. Because if it's on the camera itself, it's about the tied color profile. Because you can use them for anything. Like, yes, you can use vlog and stills. I still don't recommend it. But, yeah. So, definitely fill me in a little bit more on what you're looking for, Oasis. As a hectic... Or this is... as a hectic docu-shooter in India, the S5 works in so many challenging, robust environments. Also, the Canon EF and Sigma MC21 combo is fantastic for manual focus. Oh, cool. Awesome comment. Thank you. GZ, will we be seeing the implementation of hybrid zoom in the Lumix G9 Mark II in a future firmware update? Even if I did know, I couldn't tell you. Another +1 for auto capture and stuff. Leg says, is it possible to keep focus peaking on in AFC mode during video recording? I like using autofocus, but it'd be helpful to have visual indicator on what it's choosing to autofocus on. I've had that question before. At the moment, it is not possible. It's been brought up, but I don't know if it's something that is either high on a priority or something that can be done within the camera. I know that we have it for SAF, or for single autofocus. But yeah, that's kind of where my understanding is at the moment. Rhett. I find you have to change speed based on subject. Yeah, in some cases you do. For example, when tracking along, let's say like a line of bottles, the faster speed shifts in a strategy way. Yeah, the faster you move, sometimes you have to shift or work with our system to change its speed. It's a highly customizable system, so, you know, in some cases you may want to, you know, kind of dig in there a little bit with it. McCary, in LUMIX Lab, the resolution of images is lower until exported out. Any potential update to the resolution of images while editing in the app? That has been passed on to the app team that's working on it. I believe, to start with, the resolution is lower to ensure compatibility across as many devices as possible. This is the first major change to an app ecosystem for us. So a lot of times when you first develop, you know, you're making sure that you can have compatibility with the latest hardware, which obviously won't really have that big of a problem running any of these files from the cameras, photo or video. But then also in the still side with, you know, 24 megapixels and they're much larger files, sometimes a lot of that is just more down to, we need to make sure we have compatibility for all global markets that are going to be using it. But increasing the resolution of the preview on the display, and also a lot of other workarounds as people are, you know, using the app, and we're getting feedback from users of like, hey, I'd like to be able to do this with the app. That side of our team is very rapidly working and listening to all that feedback and refining it. I know we get a lot of questions as to like why remote shooting and, you know, stuff like that's not part of the S5 Mark II and the Mark IIX yet. It is coming. It's going to take a little bit longer. And a lot of that's because as we're getting feedback on how it's being used and what people like, what people don't like, what they want to see an improvement on, especially with an S5 Mark II series camera, it helps, you know, kind of refine things that eventually also become very beneficial for, you know, S9 users that now have access to that as well. So, Chris, to clarify, you think maybe a zone might be better move than one area plus, and then adjust the sensitivity positive. Yeah, that's a couple of the things, Chris. One area plus may still be fine for you. It depends on if you, a lot of that side kind of just depends. Depends on the size of the subject, what it is that you're actually doing itself, that kind of thing. But really, more importantly, I think the sensitivity side is where it might be causing more of a problem because you're going negative than going positive. But also remember, like, if you go more positive and you want the system to be more responsive, you may actually want to pull your speed down on the autofocus. So you may actually want to start tweaking some of that, because if you go really responsive but you keep your speed up, that's where you get the really quick, fast movement to where it's faster than you want it to look, and it doesn't look, you know, quote unquote cinematic. It doesn't look like a focus pull. It looks like a snap to focus. So in some cases, I know while I was doing a lot of the early testing before we released the product, I kept having to play around with those numbers to find out where I really felt comfortable with it for my particular style of shooting. And ultimately, the product that released is much closer to what I use for filmmaking, which, to be fair, is usually a lot more static type content. So, let's see here. For the AF, can we have small box around the eye instead of a big box around the face? I have asked about that for a long... Oh, thank you, OBS. I have asked about that for a very long time. Because our animal detection is like that. The more of you that let us know in the comment after this video that's how you want the UI to look, the more I can bring that to the engineering team to kind of reinforce that this is something that the market wants us to do. It's one thing for myself to say it. It's one thing for Matt to say it. It's one thing for us to be able to do this in the animal detection. It is a different thing when it comes to the human face and eye detection. So if you feel strong enough about that as a UI change, put it in the chat so that I can give that to the engineers and say, look, this is what the market's asking for. This is why I'm asking for it. It helps shift priorities and understand how all of you want to use the cameras. So OG says, so real-time LUT shortens the editing work afterwards. It can. It depends on what your workflow is. Real-time LUT can make how much time you have to spend in post less and less, but it revolves around what your workflow is. For someone like myself, who I'm fully capable of doing editing. In fact, whenever I do recorded live streams for LUMIX Live, I am shooting them in Vlog, or if I'm using the GH7, I'm shooting them in ARRILOG C3, and I'm doing, dropping LUTs, I'm adjusting the images to myself, and I'm doing it that way. But if it's something like even this, the live streaming here, I live stream in a Rec 709 because that's what YouTube likes. But I do it through real-time LUT. I have Vlog set on the camera, and then I have it set as a 709 conversion over the HDMI feed so that, you see a more finalized result. And part of that is because if I need to record something local on the camera itself, the camera has log as the recording, but my HDMI feed is coming out in 709. A little bit different because that's the HDMI monitoring for the LUT, but that's one of the ways that real-time LUT kind of grew out of. So, okay. Starting to lose my voice today as it sits. So, some of the other stuff that I wanted to talk about and make sure that I get to here, let me just go back to my notes to make sure that I'm getting everything in here. Because like I said, there are other topics here that I want to make sure that I cover. Sorry, so we did LUTs. Pre-burst shooting for photography. This is one of the other things that we've gotten actually a decent amount of questions about. So let me change into a photo mode on the camera. So one of the questions we get is actually about how do I utilize the pre-burst function on the cameras that have it. So if you want to change your focus modes, or not focus modes, your drive modes on a camera like the S5 Mark II, it's on the top left dial, has a group of boxes with a Roman numeral 1 and a Roman numeral 2. Now, I go into the main shooting menu, and what you'll see is the burst shoot settings. Out of the box, these do not ship with pre-enabled. They'll ship with SH as one of the options. And since I'm on an S5 Mark II, you see that we're at 30 frames per second. But when I go into SH pre, this is where I will now have it set that as I half press the shutter button, it's going to start storing images. And then when I fully press it, that's when it dumps those images that are in the buffer onto the memory card. And then as I keep the button pressed, it'll keep shooting until it fills the buffer, or it fills the internal memory. The pre-burst recording time, this is the part that I get a lot of questions about, is how do I change what that is? Well, it's right here. It's 1.5 second, 1 or half second. And that's always going to be relative to the frame rate that you're capturing. So if you're at 30 frames per second and you do a 1 second, it means you're going to capture 30 ahead of time, 1.5, 60, half at 15. This can be, the best way that I describe this is that if you're someone whose reaction time is maybe not the best, you can up this, and then as you get yourself more comfortable with it, if you find that your reaction time is, less than a second for certain, action items that you're trying to capture, cool. If you're less than half a second, cool. Then you can just change it and kind of like shift where in the 200-ish plus images that you can capture, where the pre, kind of starts. You shift them to what your particular use case is. So that's one that I wanted to make sure that I just kind of showed on screen here so I can reference it later. The other is Timelapse. We get a number of questions about, how do I set Timelapse up? What's important when it comes to Timelapse? And a couple of things to know here is You can shoot just straight RAW with the camera and still use the time-lapse function and still have the camera create a video file for you after you've, finished your time-lapse options. When you do it in RAW, you have to remember that you will always have a 3:2 or a 4:3 aspect ratio image, depending on the camera that you're using, because RAW files in our cameras, unless you're on a really older, kind of multi-aspect sensor camera like the LX100 Mark II, GH5S, those cameras that would actually give you the RAW in the resolution, these cameras always record the full resolution in RAW. So what happens here is when I go into, and when I hard set the dial to time-lapse, which is the second from the end on the S5 Mark II here, when I press menu, it's going to bring me right into time-lapse animation. This is that option where you have the choice to either do a time-lapse, or we do have built-in stop-motion animation. It gives you like the onion skinning look, or the kind of, I think it's just called onion skin. So it gives you the previous image or previous couple images so that you can work on positioning for that. But we're going to talk time-lapse. You have your shooting interval. In this is basically after the next, if this is on when I press the button and just let the system go, it runs the interval settings that I have. If I turn this off, it will, when it finishes the section of images that you've captured, or the count of images that you've captured, it will start another one. So we're going to leave this on. Start time, this is the one that actually I get a lot of questions about, because a lot of times if you're trying to do a longer term time lapse, it may not be something that you're going to be able to sit in front of the camera for the whole time. So this is where I can come in and set a start time. This is hyper critical that you make sure that your camera's date and time is set accurately, and if you are traveling, make sure that you are changing the time zone of the camera so that the time to start is proper. I've had a number of people come up and say, I live in New York and I'm out in LA doing a time lapse, and I set it to auto start at midnight, but it didn't start until, or it started at like 3 a.m., 4 a.m. It's because time zone wasn't set. So make sure that your time zone is set, and you can program this in so that it tells you, it will kick on. When you do this and you have a future time set, once you press the shutter, the camera's going to go to sleep, and it will turn back on when it needs to start based on the clock internally. So that's where making sure you have a good power solution. If you're USB-C powering the camera, make sure you've got something that's going to allow it to run as long as it needs to. But it stays in a sleep state until that timer hits the correct time to start. Next up is the image count. We get a lot of, so how do I figure this out? Especially if you've never done it before. If you've done a lot of this stuff before, a lot of this part in particular is going to just be like I kind of already knew that, but believe me, I get a lot of questions about it. In this case, it's like, okay, so how do I know what I want to set here? This is where in the newer cameras, we've built in what basically it's a very simplified calculator for it. So what frame rate am I outputting in? So in this case, let's say I'm doing 30 FPS. Yes, 2997, 24976, 5995. Yes, we know those are the actual frame rates, but pick the closest one. In this case, 30, since we broadcast in 30. How long do I want the video to be? So say I want to be like, a 2-minute, 30-second final video is the result that I want to have. And then how long is the event? So say this event is 24 hours. I'm going to do an entire day. Right here, it's telling me that I need 4,500 images at a 19.5-second interval. So now, and of course I hit the shutter button and remove all of that. So let's just do that again really quickly. So we've got it here. Now all I have to do is literally just press the display set button, hit yes, and now it's put that information into the calculator. The coolest thing here is that if you have the date and time set properly, so if I actually go, because I don't think I have this camera set properly with date and time, let's go to the clock. If I can remember where the clock is, there it is. Yeah, we're not right. No, are we? Yes, we are correct. I'm just, like I said at the beginning of the stream, I'm a little slow today. So right now, you'll see at the bottom, it's saying that this time lapse is going to end at 1:39 p.m. November 8th. Now, that's a little off because, like it said, technically you need a 19.2 seconds. So this is where I can come in and say, well, if I add a couple more of these, like if I add 10 more images to this, if I add 18 more images to this, I'm at exactly 24 hours. So you get to pick, is your full time the more important thing, or is getting, what your final production timeline is there. So now I know I need 4,518 images. You also have exposure leveling. Exposure leveling works when you have the camera in aperture priority. This helps understand that every time you take a photo with a modern lens that has an electronically controlled aperture, if you're setting the aperture to say f, 4.5, right? Every time that aperture closes for an image, it may be very slightly off each time between, f4.5. Then the next one might be f4.52. The next one might be f4.51. Every time you have that little slight variant, that's what happens in time-lapse, where you see like flashing or flickering, because the exposures are very slightly shifting from each other. The exposure leveling setting allows the camera to compensate because it records all that, and then it knows, okay, how it has to adjust either ISO slightly or shutter speed slightly to compensate and make sure that the values are always the same. Last but not least, you also have the new folder at Rec now. Creating new folder, what this literally does is this says, hey, when you go to start a new time-lapse, literally create a new folder. Don't include these in the existing folder structure that I have, because I want to be able to just quickly take them, bring them into my computer to work with. Once that time-lapse is done, and I don't have one queued up here, but once that time-lapse is done capturing, you then have the option to have it create a video, and that's where you can go into the settings. It pops up, it says, hey, would you like to create a time-lapse video? You pick the resolution, the frame rate, whether you want it played forward or backwards, and then you can process it out. That will create the video on the camera, so then you can just export out. I use this more as a, kind of sanity check that, yep, everything looks good. I'm set with the image, because then I'm going to bring it back into my computer. I'm going to do a much more involved edit of it, especially if I'm shooting in RAW, because I've got 6K worth of resolution to work with, because it's 6,000 pixels wide. So it's a 24 megapixel image I can be working with to then add in slides and pans and zooms and all that kind of fun stuff for the various outputs of that time lapse that I want to capture. Let's take a few more questions. I am able to run a little bit longer on today's stream than normal, so yeah, let's take a little bit more setup here. Let's see here. McCary, perhaps to keep compatibility, we can have an option to increase resolution. Yeah, stuff like that the team always looks at is like, okay, now that the app's out, now that we've expanded some of the cameras that have it, and we're understanding more of what devices, are being used for the app, it helps the team understand, okay, well, we can move maybe a little bit more this way, or maybe move a little bit this way. That kind of stuff helps us out a lot. Forgery, any comment on G92 audio frequency response, which shows multiple frequency dips? I saw someone talking about this, but then I also read through the comments and pointed out that there's a lot of controversy in how that was tested. So unless that ever gets reported formally to a service and support team, I have no comment, because I've never seen any issue, and to my knowledge, no one's ever reported any problems with that. So if you have an issue, report it to your local service and support team with documentation of like what you're finding, so that it can be formally checked out. This is an area, especially with stuff like that, where the community online can be cannot not always be the best place to try to troubleshoot something if you're seeing a problem, because people that either know enough about it or don't know enough about it all have an equal say in forums. It's better that if you are having a problem or you are detecting some sort of issue, contact directly to the manufacturer. But I can tell you, as of right now, I have seen 0 reports of any problems with that. So, yeah, That's about all I got on that one. Let's see here. Chris, I've noticed lens stabilization in the Mark II 12 to 35, 35 to 100 seems to make camera more shaky with dual IS2. Is that normal or something that's been addressed? I haven't heard really any problems with that. Obviously, I mean, it's always the first thing that I recommend is just double check firmware, make sure that it's up to date on firmware. If you have examples of it, let us know. Again, something like that, reporting it into a service team, because maybe there's a specific situation where maybe there might be, or there potentially could be something. But yeah, I haven't seen any problems with the 12 to 35 on both my G9 II and on my GH7. So I wonder if the LUT we download on LUMIX Lab can be detected in Lightroom just like the default photo style already implemented in the body. Also can't wait for hybrid zoom. The LUT that you're using in the camera itself, that is not baked into the RAW's metadata. The RAW file does not know what color profile you've used. That's why if you go into like Lightroom, you have a list of profiles that you can choose from that are camera matching, because the software knows these are the available color profiles for this camera. These are what they are designed to be. This is how they respond based on that particular sensor and that processing. So the LUT, that LUT would have to be baked in, like in its entirety, that LUT would have to be baked into the RAW file for any external software to be able to actually read and implement it. What you can do, well, I have to double check on that because I don't know if you can do that in Lightroom, which is actually just like import the LUT itself into it. I think you'd have to find a way to have it generate as a Lightroom preset or as a profile, and then you can then take that and have that as kind of like an auto import for it. But nothing from the camera is going to be able to take that LUT that you've installed on the camera at this point, and then have that get identified in external software. So, yeah. Orange says, thanks for hosting these. Is the dual native ISO sensor on the AW-UB10 the same as the GH5S? Honestly, no clue. The UB series, or the AW series, which is the BGH1, which is now, there's now the AW-UB10, which is the Pro AV version of that camera. They're very similar cameras. There are some minor changes between the two that fit the Pro AV category. But it's not a product that I have or have experience with, so I don't know what the specs 100% are on it. So yeah, I think they're the same as far as the native ISOs go. So yeah, I would start there with it. Let's see here. Still Lab is a really amazing app. Brought back a lot of fun for photo and editing. Yeah, I think it did. Can you ask devs to include hybrid zoom? Yes, we've asked about it. This is a good one. Do you know if there's more photographers coming to LUMIX? I feel that LUMIX misses a long telephoto zoom like a 150 to 600. I know Sigma has one, but I don't like the inverted zoom ring. So, are photographers coming into the LUMIX ecosystem? I can, with very strong confidence, tell you yes. And whether you believe me or not, I leave that up to you. A lot of it is actually stemmed from the release of the S9. Yes, I know there's a lot of people that have already written that camera off because there's no mechanical shutter. I understand your perspective, but knowing that there are so many various different styles of photography out there, and knowing that people's priorities are very different between every individual photographer, we have seen a huge influx. And really, since we introduced real-time LUT and we started making it more and more user-friendly, that has really shifted a lot of photographers into adding a Lumix camera into your ecosystem. The S9 being the, kind of the more travel friendly version of the cameras. But even when it comes to like the S5 series, we're seeing a lot more photographers, or whether they were videographers originally or whether you are a videographer originally, we're seeing a lot more photos being taken with these cameras. And by a lot more, I mean by like a substantial number. But it really leans more into that, a decade ago you had photographers, videographers, and you really never crossed paths with each other, right? Back when I was photographing weddings, I remember it was the photographers and videographers were always at each other's throats as to who was in what position and moving, and you kind of just hated each other, and you had to work with each other because the client paid for both. Now, in the modern era, that just doesn't exist. You have photographers that are, kind of dipping your toe in videography. Maybe it's for, because a client requires it. Maybe it's because you got bored and you want to try something new with the camera because, hey, your camera's got this, why not try it? But also on the other side, you have a lot of videographers that are looking at this saying like, well, I also like taking pictures, and if I have this equipment, why don't I try it and move it in? So the point of that being is that everyone's actually shifting a lot closer to this kind of like ideal hybrid concept, the thing that we created, we kicked off years and years ago. So by extension, yes, there's a lot more photography being done with the cameras. And with that comes a lot more of the realization or the discovery that we have not been sleeping on the photography capabilities with our cameras. The high resolution shot mode, I would argue we are the easiest, most practical use of being able to actually take a higher resolution image while working with stabilization, handheld or on a tripod. Live view composite, we are still the only full frame camera that does this, that makes astrophotography, light painting, that creative style of photography easier than any other camera in the industry, period, end of story. You can fight me on that one. We have a lot of these features built into the cameras that make that stuff so much more attainable to especially new photographers that look up to higher end photographers, because they want to be able to capture images like them. And a lot of that's getting, seen more, as we've seen in the, in the chat too. The launch of LUMIX Lab also makes it to now where it's, especially from photography perspective, it's not as big of a deal to take the photos with your camera if they're going to automatically get sent to your mobile device, so that you can still post them like you would if you took the photo on your camera, on your phone. But now it's a much higher quality image. So yeah, we see a ton there. Now, when you start going into the, I'd say, more specific areas of photography, yes, things change a little bit. Longer telephoto lenses. I understand the perspective. The inverted zoom ring between the Sigma and Lumix lenses. I get it. But in reality, the shows that I've been to, the reports that I've read from our team members that work birding shows and wildlife shows, it's not actually showing to be as big of a problem for many. Not to diminish, your own perspective on it, because even for myself, I know I can struggle with that a little bit. The inverted zoom rings on some lenses, but really in the end, the optics are physically there, and we are seeing the adoption, especially in the wildlife side. With the improvements that we've made, I know that we hear a lot of requests. People want an ultra telephoto from us. That's just because you want the Lumix experience with it. But I highly encourage you, at least if you're in a position where wildlife is something that you really want to do, try the Sigma lenses, rent one. Go out and shoot with it, because the biggest thing I'd say is that, especially with the zoom direction conversation, if and when you get out into the field with a camera and lens set up like that maybe it's backwards from what you're used to, after 5 minutes of actually being out there shooting, especially because I'm not changing lenses, for that, if I'm going to go out and I'm going to use the 150 to 600 or 60 to 600 from Sigma, it's not like I'm going out there with that lens and like 3 other lenses and I'm going to be swapping between them in the field. That's the lens that's attached to the camera. In the field, I never end up noticing it. You know, maybe for the first 2 minutes. But then after that, it's like, no, I'm fully on board with this. I get it. My brain immediately clicks into what direction I have to go. So, yeah, we do see a lot of photographers. All of that say yes, we see a lot of photographers adopting into the Lumix ecosystem now, or hybrid users. Because really that's what all of us are anymore. All right. Let us, I have 3 other things that I really want to just kind of touch on quickly here. So focus transition, live cropping, if you're in the video side of the camera use. Depending on the camera that you have, not all cameras have live crop or focus transition. Some of them do. If I can remember to put a list down in the description, I will. I can't make any promises that I'll remember to do that. But focus transition, we've talked about this one a couple of times before. Focus transition allows me to manually come in and adjust my focus to say like, hey, I want to say focus on the GH7 back here, and be able to then go, okay, pick a position for it. In this case, I'm going to pick position 1. Then I want to bring focus in. I want to focus on the color checker, and I want to have that set to be position 2. And then I want to go really close with the focus. So this would be like right there, right? And I want to set that for position 3. So now that I have those set, when I actually go into set, I can then go in and, in this case, I got to use the directional pad for it. So I've got position 1, and I can have the camera, smoothly make these focus pulls and do it in a repeatable way. So this is completely bypassing the autofocus system. This is saying I need to be able to do a repeated focus pull. If you're a wedding videographer and you're doing like a setup shot with the rings, this can be something that helps you not have to necessarily say like, tap on the screen and then figure like, well, maybe it's not moving fast enough for me. I have the ability to come in and change the speed that I want this to be in. So, and I think I just exited out of it. Yeah. So if I come in here, I can change the speed to be like super fast. So now with the focus transition, I can go really, really fast from point A to point B, or I can really slow it down. So that's how you can set that up. It's literally just manually focusing, picking the point, set your up to 3 points. When you're not connected over HDMI or pumping the HDMI info feed out, I can use the touch screen and actually, tap on which one I want. And that gives me that kind of control over it. The other video function thing here I wanted to talk about is live crop. Live crop is the function in the camera that allows you to do a punch in, a pan, a zoom, in a either 20 or 40 second output image. Now, depending on what resolution you have your camera set to, right now I'm in 4K, which means it's going to give me a 1080p option. So I can go all the way here. So I'm going to start at a full height and width of this as my main point. And then my second box, we're going to come in here. We're going to make this as small as I can, which again, this is going to be a 1080p output. And I can, or actually, no, this will be a 4K output, and set it here. So now I have my 2 particular shots. So now if I actually go to hit record, actually, can I do it in with this? Yeah, so we've got those 2. Let me throw a memory card in here so that you can see it. Go on here. All right, I got a card in here now. So now we've got it set up. So now if I hit the record on it, you'll actually see now that I'm not even touching it and it's doing that zoom in for me. So now it's actually going to record that full clip with that those 2 frames. So those marks that I put. You can do this through panning. If I stop the recording, it goes back out to normal. If I come in, I can change this to say 20 seconds if I want this to be much faster. So now as I do it, actually, I just I just did 2 of the exact same frame. So I can come in, let's start here, and then let's go all the way in. let's go here. So now you'll see that this will be much faster. So the live crop, it's going to take the main resolution you have of the sensor, and then you can go to different outputs. In this case, it's 4K output. And it records the footage that way. So now you need to be able to do a quick little punch in and you know, kind of zoom, or you need to do a pan. You can do it in camera, and you don't really need a lot of extra tools for it. It's just one of those extra little pieces we have that adds that next little level of control to your camera. The last thing that I want to talk about, or the last two things I want to talk about, is segmented file recording. We added this in because when you go to SDXC cards, so that's a 64 gig or larger memory card, the cameras will not auto segment files, at least as fast as an SDHC card did. They will segment out at, I believe, 96 gigs for the file size before it has to write another file, and that's actually a card specification or a file structure specification. It's not because we want to; that's because that's what the cards require. CF Express, it's a much higher level. I think it's like 900 gigs or something like that. I forget what the largest file size is, but we added segmented file recording into a lot of these cameras specifically so that you have that option. If you're recording something and it's a really, really long take, you have that option to come in here and say, like, hey, break this file up every 3 minutes. So every 3 minutes, it will close and continue a file. This allows that, like, should you have any problem, right? Should you have a power drop? Should you have, you know, something that just interrupts the camera's recording? You now have segments of every 3 minutes. The flip side, or the potential headache of this, is that if you have this on, all of a sudden now all of your files, instead of one long file to work with, now if you've got this set to like 1 minute, you did a 30-minute recording, you've got 31-minute clips to put together. So be smart in how you use it. It may not be applicable to every scenario that you're using, but it can be invaluable in certain situations, especially because, like I said, you can set this to 10 minutes. So if I'm doing a 30-minute recording and it's like hypercritical, I can set this to do 30 minutes, have it segment at 10 minutes, because I want to make sure that no matter what, if something happens, I've got the you know, first 10 minutes. Say at the 12-minute mark, something drops and, you know, your power gets yanked out or something along those lines. Well, I know I've got that 10 minutes. That entire clip isn't destroyed because of power loss or the cart, you know, something failing like that. The absolute last thing that I wanted to show everybody here is actually, I'm going to put the camera into the photo mode real quick here. I get questions a couple of times of, like, you know, I want to be able to control or change the controlling things like ISO, but I don't want to have to keep clicking on the button on the top of the camera to change things like ISO. A little known function within our cameras is actually in this option called dial set. If you go into dial set, you have up to 5 different sets here for how the front and rear dial works in the various different PAS and M modes. And this is in the photography modes. So by default, this will be on set 1, which is just that in aperture, both dials control aperture. In shutter, both control shutter. In manual, front is shutter, rear, or front is aperture, rear is shutter speed. You can flip those with set 3. You can flip all of it. You can change how each of these things work, at least within some control. You also have the ability to change the rotation of these dials. So depending on which one, you know, gives you more control for it. You also have control dial assignment. This is the one that I think a lot of people don't know that we have in the camera. Control dial is this dial here, is the rotation of this one. So I can come in here and say, I don't want this to do headphone volume. I want this to do my ISO. So now while I'm sitting here, I can just rotate the rear dial on this, and I'm in shutter priority. Let's go here and change my mode here so that we can see everything on the screen. So now I can use the rear thumb dial or the rear dial here, and I can change this so that I can just quickly have access to my ISO values. I can also come in and change this to change the focus frame size, right? So on the fly, if I'm in a mode that allows me to change the size, so let's go to one area, I can use this to just automatically, this will just let me drop right in. No matter what I'm doing, I can change this and just adjust what the focus frame size. You also have control for exposure comp, exposure aperture control. So I can now have this set so that my aperture is controlled with the rear dial. I don't have to use the front dial. I can if I want, but I can have the rear do it as well. So it changes. You have a lot of that kind of control. You also have dial operation switch setup. So this is where I can come in. There's another option that allows you to, kind of dual assign what your front and rear dial do. So I can come in and say that I want, when I click on that or I assign that to a button, I want it to be controllable with those particular dials. Exposure compensation, you can have that auto applied to one of the rear dials or front dial if you want. And then menu operation, you can change the direction that the dials work within the menu systems. So you have a ton of control to set the camera up for how you want it to work. And then on top of that, even further, white balance, ISO, and exposure. If you've come from Canon, you have one experience with when you would push ISO and then how you would adjust that setting. If you come from Nikon, you have a different experience than that. What's cool is that within our system, you have while pressing, which means I have to press and hold the white balance button before I can make an adjustment to it. After pressing one means that I can press the button once, make the change, and then I press the button again to lock it in. Or the way we have it set, which is after pressing 2, means that I press it once, I make my change, and then I can just hit the shutter button and go back into shooting. So you have a lot of control there as well for customizing. Your ISO settings, this one is not set out of the box. Out of the box, it's just set ISO, ISO. But I also have the option to do ISO limit and ISO. What this means is that if I press the ISO button, my front dial lets me set my upper limit for ISO. My rear dial lets me select independently down into auto ISO. This this ISO limit is what allows me to just come in and say like, hey, I want to be in auto ISO, but I don't want the camera to go over, say, 3200 ISO. That's a quick access into that control. And totally last, before I do have to drop off this stream now, is exposure comp dial settings. If you want quick access to be able to do bracketing, go into exposure comp dial settings, change cursor buttons up and down to this symbol. Now, when I click on that symbol, I can press up and down to quickly cycle through the available exposure bracketing options that we have on the cameras. Yeah. Let me just double check. I saw there were a couple questions that just came through. Just want to make sure. Can you talk on some recent videos where folks prefer the image quality of the OG S5 versus the S5 II? Why would that matter? Or B, I shoot GH7 and shot S1H and the image quality was so dang close. What am I missing? You're not really missing much, at least in my opinion. I understand why some people like processing on particularly older cameras, but things change. And we said they were going to change when we moved into PDAF era. That's why I went LUMIX route, the ease and multiple tools making work easier. Just the flash side I'm not terribly on board with, but the fact that you make lives, the user experience, gold. Yeah, I am working on an actual stream about flash because I have an entire Godox system here, literally off camera, that I want to do something with. I think the stream in 2 weeks, I think, has to be recorded, so maybe I'll use that stream to talk about flash photography. Maybe I'll tie in some live composite and cool things you can do with strobes and live composite for that. Maybe. I have to make sure I find time for that. Cool. All right. With that, everybody, thank you so much for tuning in. If you liked this stream, give us a like. It helps grow and show, at least works in with the algorithms and all that kind of fun stuff. If you haven't already and you liked this kind of stream, think about giving us a subscribe if you don't. We already have a pretty high subscriber rate for those that are joining on the stream, but maybe if this is your first time, or maybe you don't subscribe but you watch these anyway, think about giving us a subscription. Doesn't cost you anything. It's just a way to help us grow and reach more people. We will be back next Thursday, 2 p.m. Eastern Time, live here on YouTube. So, actually, let me just double check my schedule on this one. I'm like 99% sure next Thursday. Yes, next Thursday is another live stream. If you have topics that you want us to talk about, drop them in the comment section after this video is posted. That helps me make sure that I'm covering topics that y'all actually want to hear and talk about. And if you have recommendations for things that you want to see, firmware updated, all that kind of stuff, if you commented those in the chat here, just make sure to copy and paste that down into the comment section after the video is posted. It's easier for me to be able to bring those points to the engineering team, to the software teams, when it's in the comments, instead of having to go back through the video and see where that comment was in the thread. Cool. Yeah, with that, like I said, we'll be back next Thursday, 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Thank you again, everybody, for tuning in. I loved all the comments, all the chat back and forth. This is exactly why we keep doing these and will keep doing these live streams. Otherwise, have a great weekend. Get out there, create some cool stuff. Check us out on socials if you don't already. Share your work out on social. And yeah, otherwise, later. Bye.